Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. Elena, you can take this thing off the. Yes, thank you. Oh, awesome. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome, everyone. My name is Soraya Dean. I will be moderating this call today. We have some incredible speakers and panelists. We will talk about anti Semitism in education. As we all know, anti Semitism is a chronic problem. It can thrive in any environment. It is a virus. We know it is a virus, ever mutating and always returning. So, who am I and who are the Muslim Women's Coalition who's standing up to fight anti Semitism today? Um, Anila Ali is the founder and CEO of American Muslim Multi-Faith Women Empowerment Council. After October 7th, she reached out to a coalition of us Muslim women and she said, we need to collaborate because this problem is larger than we can ever imagine. So because of the vision that Anila has created, we have all come together to address this virus, I might have to say again, and I run a Muslim Women Speakers Bureau. We have over 25 Muslim women speaking on this topic, on the topic of hate, anti-Americanism, anti-Semitism, extremism, and we are united in as a front today, not just fighting for against anti-Semitism, even fighting for our own survival. This is a highly contentious topic in the Muslim world. Nobody embarks on it, and we do so nevertheless, because I think this is not a time for silence and consensus. We have to create it. We can't go and solicit consensus. What we see in the Muslim world is anti-Semitism and Zionism being conflated with Israeli government. Most of the Muslims and most others say, I have no problem with the Jews, but I hate Zionists. And at the Muslim Women's Speakers and the American Muslim Multi-Faith Women's Empowerment Council, we assert that while dissent against the Israeli government's actions is legitimate part of global political dialogue, Muslim world must stop using it as an excuse for Jew hatred. Because I come from the community, I have a right and I have a duty to speak the truth. So therefore, I will refer very often to my community. Because Dr. King reminds us the concept of moral reciprocity. Before we go fix the world, we have to fix ourselves. So the purpose of this call is also to build radical solidarity, because we believe ongoing discourse and action against anti-Semitism is essential for promoting social harmony and justice. And today in our program, we will reflect and examine closely post-October 7th, the rise of anti-Semitism in schools, in government, in campuses, and in between individuals. We will talk about the faculty, funding, and the ideology per se. What drives anti-Semitism? The complex relationship between Muslims, Jews, and anti-Semitism in America. The tragedy, I must take a personal moment here. The tragedy of anti-Semitism is very close to my heart. I have heard it, I have witnessed it, and I have felt it. I have been called even to participate in it. There's clearly anti-Semitic incitement in many circles, and particularly in American Muslim circles. Most of you know the journalist Mehdi Hassan. He's well known. Writing to the news statement, the newspaper, he said, it pains me to have to admit this, but anti-Semitism isn't just tolerated in some sections of the British Muslim community. It is routine and it is commonplace. Any Muslim reading this article, if they're honest with themselves, will know instantly what I'm referring to. It's our dirty little secret, says Mehdi Hassan. You could call it the banality of the Muslim world, and that is anti-Semitism. So we will focus very closely about, we have, and Anila knows this, we know this, all the Muslims around us know this, that we want to first put our house in order. In order to do that, lots of people are in denial that they are anti-Semitic. So I will share with for the listeners and for my community in particular, the definition of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is prejudice, discrimination, hostility, or violence against Jews as Jews. It can manifest as hatred, stereotypes, and harmful rhetoric or actions directed towards Jewish individuals, communities, or institutions. It is a form of racism and discrimination that has persisted for centuries, with historical roots in religious prejudice and evolving into a broader form of hatred targeting Jews as a distinct group. So today we have a very impactful, I would say, program. I made my opening statements. I'm going to introduce each speaker. They're going to speak for 5 to 6 minutes. I'm going to ask a clarifying question, and thereafter we'll open it to questions from the audience. So our first speaker today is Miri. Miri is Dr. Miri Bra Halpern is the Director of Trauma Training and Services at Parents for Peace and a lecturer in psychology at Harvard Medical School, where she supervises psychology, interns, and psychiatric residents. Since the October 7th Hamas attack and the rise in anti-Semitism and extremism, Dr. Bar Halpern has led coordinated mental health efforts to support affected individuals and communities, organizations, consultations, therapy groups, and campus outreach and educational webinars. She regularly speaks on the intersection of anti-Semitism, trauma, and radicalization, offering a trauma-informed lens on complex socio-political dynamics. Speaking to us, Dr. Halpern will today address anti-Semitism in K through 12 mental health aspects on students exposed to anti-Semitism and the radicalization and also the effect it has on parents. Miri.
Thank you. Oh, Miri is totally fine. Thank you so much for having me, Soraya, and thank you everybody for joining us. 6 minutes is not enough to talk about such a complex topic, but I'll do my best. Just to give you a little bit of data, since 23, there was a huge surge of anti-Semitism, specifically in K-12. I believe 135% increase in 23 alone, and it's even more in 20 now that it's 25, and we're closing the data as well. And what people need to understand about anti-Semitism, that what we're seeing in college campuses, I know Sarah's going to talk about later, it actually starts in K-12. Education is key. And unfortunately, I was exposed to some material where I live where our kids, I have 2 young kids, our kids are literally being brainwashed into hate. Instead of teaching them critical thinking, they're teaching black and white type of thinking. There is no nuance in it. And that actually causes more polarization. So to be more specific, what I've been seeing in my clinic and what I've been hearing from working with educators and from students all over the US actually, is that Jewish students are being targeted. They're being called baby killers. They're being held accountable for every action of the Israeli government. They're being bullied for who they are. Just to make it more specific, I can share a story about a client that actually moved here because of the war. He was displaced. His family was displaced from Israel. They're immigrants here. And his brother stayed as a lone soldier in Israel for the IDF. And this 16-year-old, when he goes to school, his friends are calling him baby killers and telling him that they wish his brother would die and that October 7th should have happened. And he's now isolating, refusing to leave his room sometimes, starting to self-harm and talk about suicidality, has increased anxiety and hypervigilant, and is really isolating. Think about an immigrant that's coming to a new culture in a new country and not only has no friends, but being bullied for a part of his identity. And another example is a 13-year-old American Jewish girl that goes to public school system. And she grew up as a Reformed Jew. She goes to synagogue. She actually has a Star of David. And she stopped wearing her Star of David, and she started to isolate even more, start to have panic attacks, refused to go to school, and recently actually told her mom that she doesn't want to be Jewish anymore because it's not safe for her. So this is what we're dealing with right now in terms of more personal stories. And I've been seeing it in my clinic day in and day out, where the students are just afraid. Now, I want to say a word about Israeli immigrants specifically. Where I live, there is actually a big population of Israeli immigrants, and it's almost this double burden where they're not only being bullied for being Jewish, they're also being bullied for being Israelis. And that can create an issue with shame about your identity and lack of pride of who you are. So some of them don't have the privilege to hide their identity. For some of us Jewish people, for some of us, we can hide our identity, or we decide whether or not to display it. For them, it's a little bit more tricky than that. And not to mention that in general, if you hide your identity, that comes with a lot of guilt and a lot of shame later on as well. We know that from studies about marginalized group. But for Israeli students, they have that extra layer where people are not seeing them, are not helping them, and are bullying them more, and they carry a lot of intergenerational trauma as is. For a lot of Jewish people, there is the intergenerational trauma of the Holocaust. For Israelis, there is also the war and the Intifada that plays a role into that, and they literally just came from a state of war. So my area of research is about traumatic invalidation in the Jewish community, and our research shows that the Jewish community right now, and it doesn't matter if it's K to 12 or college population and so on, are actually meeting the criteria for that. There's 9 different criteria. And it's basically when someone is ignoring your emotions, when someone is neglecting you or denying your reality, or the whataboutism that we're seeing, right? If I share my pain, the next sentence is, well, what about the people over there? There is lack of ability to hold pain right now. And in trauma work, if you can't name it, you can't heal it. You have to be able to name the pain and hold the pain in order for to move forward from the trauma. And Sarah, you mentioned the parents. So yes, the parents are holding the toll. And the reason for that is right now there is a lack of trust in authority, and there's lack of trust in schools. So when you send your kids to school, which is where they spend most of their day, you want to believe that they're going to be protected. And if they're not protected, there's going to be a person they can go to and say, I'm being bullied, or I don't feel safe. Right now, for a lot of Jewish parents, it's not the case. They don't have that person in school. So parents are checking curriculums. They're looking at the books that their kids are reading. They are trying to talk with the board. They're trying to see, are the schools actually trauma-informed environment? Schools are supposed to be trauma-informed, which basically means they need to be safe for everybody. They need to not only be safe physically, but also emotionally, and prevent re-traumatization. So I can share with you an anecdote. When I went last year, the first day of school, I walked my kids to school, and in a public school system, and there's flags everywhere. My eyes directly went to check, is there an Israeli flag? And that's because I want my kids to feel belong. I want them to feel seen. That is what trauma informed actually means, to be feel seen and to feel safe. Now, in terms of psychological aspects, so we talked about the anxiety and the depression and all the way to self-harm and suicidality, which we also see with patients who experience trauma. Antisemitism, mental health aspect is very similar to trauma symptoms. But the other issue with that is that it prevents them from reaching their academic abilities. Because when someone is under a state of trauma or under a state of constant hypervigilance, the part of the brain that's supposed to be the one who's in charge of problem solving and executive functioning and everything that a student needs to in order to be successful in the classroom, it completely shuts down. Because that other part of the brain, it's the emotional brain, that fight, flight, freeze response, or who's going to bully me today? What's going to happen? That part takes over. So we also see a decline in the academic ability of Jewish students and Israeli students as well. And nobody's doing anything about it, which is a problem. So back to the parents and back to the students, we need to create an environment where the toll doesn't fall on the parents, where we're looking at a school system from the leadership to be able to say no more. We're going to protect all students. And here's exactly what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And to close the loop afterwards with the parents and with the community as well. We need to come together as a community that fights hate. And the last thing I would say, because I know my time is up, is that anti-Semitism, it is not a Jewish problem. It is a non-Jewish problem. It's affecting Jewish people, and it's affecting non-Jewish people as well. In my organization, Parents for Peace, we actually have the data to show that anti-Semitism is the connective tissue across all extreme ideologies, which means while Jewish students are being more vulnerable for all the psychological issues that come with anti-Semitism, your students, your kids are at risk to become more vulnerable to radicalization because they're not being taught critical thinking. And because when there is hate toward one group, we're going to see hate toward every other group. It is the gateway drug into radicalization. And this is why it should matter to everybody, not just for the Jewish people. And this is why I'm so grateful, Sarai, for you having this conference today, this workshop, because I think it should be a wake-up call for every person that cares about our kids.
Wow, thank you, Mary. I mean, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You so eloquently and sadly told us what is happening in the schools, but and the need for resources for students, parents, family, even alumni, right? We
Yeah.
all need resources. But, recently the NEA, the National Education Association, the largest teachers union in the United States, recently voted to stop using materials that was provided by the ADL. And we know ADL has a large corpus of work that they have done, particularly to address this in the education system. What happened to that? Do you know why they prevented? What happened to it? And where are we now?
Yes, it's about politics and dehumanization. That's the short answer of that. I think what we're seeing that's happening in the US and unfortunately around the world, and I can also talk about locally, we see it with the Massachusetts Teacher Association here in Massachusetts, where people's identity, especially Jewish identity, is becoming dehumanized and politicized. Meaning, we can't teach about the Holocaust according to them because it's too political, and they're trying to erase the Jewish part in the Holocaust studies. Now, I would say that Holocaust education is absolutely important and crucial, and it's not enough because education should also include Jewish pride. And while Holocaust is part of the problem, we need to talk about it. We need to have all of it because we need to be humanized. It cannot be just about the dead Jews. It needs to be also the Jews that are alive. So where are we standing with that? People are fighting it. Sarah might know a little bit more about that with the NEA than me, where we're standing. I can tell you that at least with the Massachusetts Teacher Association, there are a lot of resolutions around Massachusetts to make sure the teachers are being able to teach nuances and to check the material that they're teaching. I mean, educators, they are doing such an incredible job. They have in my opinion, one of the hardest jobs in the world. And we trust them to educate our kids, to create human beings that are part of society, that are able to be a valuable part of society. But they don't have time to check all the materials because they're working so hard. So when you have unions putting stuff online as the material, and if I was a teacher, I would trust my union because why would I question that? I wouldn't necessarily check. That's where the problems start because we're using materials that are not vetted and are actually radicalizing our kids and are literally anti-Semitic. And I think, Sarah, I sent you some of the material of the MTA. This is like one of the examples, but California, unfortunately, is not better. And there are other places around the US that have very similar content that instead of looking at Judaism as an ethno-religion, part of ethnic studies, they're putting it down and down. And when you're doing that, you're making us invisible, but we refuse to be invisible.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. I'm going to show that video that I saw myself and I was aghast because my son was also bullied for being a Muslim after September 11th. So I can really relate to what you're saying. I'm going to ask Elena to show us that little video. Volume, Elena, volume.
There's no audio.
Yes, we need volume.
With the idea of education, you've actually been calling out Qatar for a number of years as being, kind of infiltrating into our educational system.
Back in 2012, we had a parent come to us in Williamson County. She said, "You'll never believe what we're teaching our kids in Williamson County schools. And I said, come over, bring me the book. She brought me the textbook. There was a quote that legitimized Palestinians blowing themselves up in a Jerusalem restaurant, Sparrow Pizzeria, because they were waging a war against Israeli government policies and army actions. This incident actually occurred on November 29th that year. We know what November 29th is, Nakba Day.
Yeah.
And the teacher decided she was going to do a lesson on the Middle East. And she brings in a guy who's supposedly an Arab, who supposedly is an expert on the Middle East. And he was qualified because he'd been there 11 times. She brought me the materials. I looked through the book. I said, leave me the book. I went from cover to cover. Not only was there anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, anti-Zionist content, but there was anti-American and anti-Judeo-Christian, the values that our country was founded upon. So Qatar, in 2012, when we were doing the research, the funders of this propaganda, these textbooks, Pearson published textbooks, were Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Libya. Pearson is not even a US-based textbook publishing company. They're British-based. So what are we doing with British-based textbooks in our US-based schools? Today, it's flipped because now Qatar, with all of its wealth, is the major investor, Qatar and the CCP. Qatar spends $1.6 billion on K through 12 education.
In the United States alone.
In the United States. We wonder why our kids are marching in pro-Hamas rallies with terrorists. Oh my gosh, it's because of what we've been indoctrinating our kids with. So we're teaching our kids, we need to stand up for what is right and we need to be vocal. So our kids see this whole conflict that's going on. And because they've already been indoctrinated, they see Israel as the bad guy. And poor Hamas and the Gazans.
Yeah.
And now poor Iran.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
So I would just put a plug based on that video and the previous conversation. I can put in the chat the link to Parents for Peace. We do have a helpline. So if you're worried about your loved one being radicalized, that's basically what we do. We try to get people out of the hate cycle and to also do training for school educators and to the community.
Thank you. Yeah. It's alarming. $1.8 billion for US education. And we have alerted this 10 years ago, but nobody paid attention to this. Anyway, thank you so much for your insightful presentation. Our next speaker is Mas Cheung. He's an educational activist looking to inform about the various areas affected by regressive social justice ideas that have warped the progressive landscape. He runs a private podcast shared by a loose group known as the Stop CRT. He's a volunteer with the Institute for Liberal Values. Mars will talk to us today about the moral and cultural inversion that led to the breeding ground for anti-Semitism. Woke culture bleeds into social movements, he says, through critical race theory and in social movements such as Black Lives Matter and other left-wing activists. So he's going to talk about the fooling and the fertile ground that has created anti-Semitism. Mars?
Thank you, Soraya. Well, I think I should probably start out by pointing out the elephant in the room. I think I'm one of the only non-Jews on this panel, so you're probably wondering what the hell is this guy doing here? I consider myself an education activist because of my running into what I call the moral inversion of Western values several years ago via my interest in the intellectual and philosophical areas of my life. The anti-Semitism we're seeing now didn't just explode out of nowhere. It gestated in a toxic environment because of this inversion. Moral philosophy is a subject that I have a particular interest in, given the fact that we now live in a shrinking 21st century world in which peoples of very different ethical backgrounds are forced to interact. So about 10 years ago, I noticed something off about my fellow progressives. We typically involve ourselves in conversations, dialogues, and meetings celebrating the modern moral achievements made possible by Enlightenment humanism, the abolition of slavery, the elevation of women's rights, the acknowledgement that sexual and racial minorities share the same inherent dignity as all human beings. But for some reason, I noticed that when it came to criticizing practices in reverse of these values, especially in non-Western cultures, suddenly these values were applied very inconsistently. One example I'll give is I think fundamentalist Christianity is fair game. It can be freely criticized without most consequence today. But when you bring up fundamentalist Islam, even when it's pointed out that that the fundamentalism in Islam is practiced in a far harsher version than you'll find in Christianity, the criticism was off limits, usually accompanied by a smear of Islamophobia. And for some reason, the idea that you can have nuance in this conversation, that it just flew over everyone's head in the space and everywhere I was. You can condemn extremism while also affirming that there are many peaceful Muslim peoples who exist, and but that nuance was just swept aside. And that was my first glimpse into of something that I now loosely term social justice fundamentalism or woke. Before I go further, I want to be very, very clear about what I do and don't mean. So the original term came from the 1930s when a musician pushed it. It meant be aware, be cautious, be alert to the dangers of racial injustice. And that's something I absolutely champion. But the current state of woke bears very little resemblance to this. And in modern parlance, I believe it points to this kind of ideology that enforces an incredibly dogmatic form of social justice based off a single core idea, that the idea that all of society is strictly organized into racial power structures. White at the top, everyone else at the bottom. If there's inequality, then the only reason that inequality exists, it must be as a result of that hierarchy. Subjects such as culture, personal agency, or the diversity within broad categories like Asian, Black, Middle Eastern, what have you, don't matter. Only skin color matters. And your placement as a result within that framework not only determines your level of oppression, but it also mandates a narrative that must be followed to the letter. So if we see a minority enjoy a level of success or prosperity which this ideology denies that they can, it really bends reality, bends it backwards to justify this view. And the only framework which is open to criticism is anything perceived to be white. So I began to see how this was being played out in education and within several of our institutions. Some examples I'll give is an event at Claremont McKenna College where Dean Mary Spellman was forced out for using the phrase uh, "don't fit the mold" in an email, which she, in an attempt to reach out to a student who felt like she didn't belong. It didn't matter that her intent was benign. The context didn't matter as well. It was only the interpretation of offense, the perspective of punching down that was salient. There's Lowell High School in San Francisco where admission standards were scrapped because too many Asians were excelling. And so instead of celebrating achievement, success itself became a problem. There are many other examples, but the point here is that these happenstances weren't isolated missteps. They were part of a pattern coming forth from within this ideology. And within this framework, and especially during recent years, even before October 7th, you started hearing some of this whispering in some of these circles that Jews were white oppressors, Jews were colonizers. Never mind the fact that Jews are targets of white supremacists, or that Jewish identity itself spans a diverse ethnic and cultural backgrounds. This ideology just recast Jews as not as a vulnerable minority, but as part of the enemy class. Do I really need to say anything about post-October 7th? Even before Israel responded, anti-Semitism was just surging forth openly. I saw Jewish students being harassed on campus. I saw institutions turn a blind eye or even applaud this activity. We see incidences in school board meetings and even blatantly within grade school classrooms. There was an incident in which Jewish parents showed up at school board meetings protesting against anti-Semitism, and they were shouted down, um, being accused of only showing up for their race. You had smaller things like a coloring assignment at Chula Vista Elementary School featuring a helmet with a swastika, which should send a clear signal that this atmosphere is tolerant of anti-Semitism or permissive of it. So long story short, when I say I encountered anti-Semitism in today's classroom, it was after a long process of after observing this ideology afflict different peoples. And it's the same dogmatic ideology applied to many quote unquote DEI programs. This new breed of woke, this new social justice dogma was the breeding ground for the resurgence of anti-Semitism that's now taken shape. And that's why I'm here, because anti-Semitism doesn't begin with swastikas. It begins with an ideology that oversimplistically divides the world into good and evil, oppressor and oppressed, and qualifying by people strictly by this by the basis of their skin color, leading to the idea that Jews no longer count as a real minority. Now, there are consequences to this. Probably the most alarming one is how the journalist Barry Weiss defines it, when she stated that anti-Semitism is an indicator of the health of our society. And if that's true, and if the current levels remain as they are, that should be cause for alarm for all of us. And if my interest in history has taught me anything, it's that what starts with our Jewish neighbors will not stop with our Jewish neighbors. First step in solving it is to recognizing that this ideology exists and it must be named and recognized, because that's the key to beginning to resolve the issue.
Thank you, Mas. Wow, compelling. And you spoke about these broad indictments towards the Jews, colonizer, genocider, apartheid. And you said you are not a Jew, but you visited Israel. What did you see that you can tell us? Did you see religious persecution of minorities? Did you see apartheid? Just tell us a little bit so that people who have not visited Israel, who are making these broad indictments and running forward with these deadly slogans, what do they need to know?
Okay, so because of my activities, I was invited to take part in a Sharaka delegation in mid-2023. You can look up Sharaka online, but in short, that organization was born out of a series of events involving youth leaders from Israel and the Gulf coming together to meet and explore each other's countries and cultures, especially in light of after the signing of the Abraham Accords. We toured the country. The delegation I was in had a chance to see many of the country's historical sites, some of the most memorable being the Old City in Jerusalem, the Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum, and we also even had the chance to visit inside the Knesset itself. But my most memorable memories were not what I saw at those sites, but they had to deal more with the conversations of the people I met and those I'd spoken to there. One event really stood out in particular. There was a time when we drove to the north of Israel. We visited the Galilee Medical Center in Naharia. In addition to showcasing some incredible medical technology, the hospital was a fantastic display of culture and religious diversity. Inside the hospital, I saw Druze, Muslims, Christians, and Jews just coming together to provide medical care not just for Israelis, but also for Syrian refugees, which is a country, if I'm not far mistaken, that has traditionally been an enemy of Israel's. But another striking event was a meeting over dinner with a gentleman by the name of Naftali Aklum. And he's an Ethiopian Black Jew who shared his unique story about he and other Ethiopian Jews made it over to Israel. For those who are who are more interested about this particular sect of Jews, some of their story is chronicled in a 2019 movie with Chris Evans, The Dead Sea Diving Resort.
Mm.
But meeting Naftali and also meeting several of the Muslim citizenry, it really illustrated the vast diversity under the term Jew, which we can also include Mizrahim, Sephardic, and others. But which again, all this just really contradicts current social justice dogma that Jews are white oppressors and their obsession with that strict intersectional stack. There's a huge diversity of peoples under that umbrella term.
Thank you.
So,
Yes, you had
it-
something to finish? Yeah.
yeah, I just want to finish with this. Why am I saying all of this? Because post October 7th, we're seeing a flood of disinformation about the country regarding the war in Gaza, and many of the old accusations are rearing their head again. But as an individual who's been there himself and spoken to diverse sets of people there, it's very, very hard to take the accusations of apartheid or white colonialism seriously. And those misconceptions are what are of the country are what I believe to be fueling the anti-Semitism we're seeing now. But I'd like to end with a challenge for our listeners. Even if I was to grant that Israel is a genocidal state, and I don't, does any of that justify anti-Semitism? One common saying we see thrown about right now is never again, and most of us think that refers to the Holocaust in World War II. But I take a broader view on this and believe that in addition to the Holocaust, the atrocities of the period should never be repeated, which included the internment of our Japanese citizens during World War II. Now, that's a tragedy that should fall under the umbrella of never again,
Mm.
because Japanese citizens then and and Jewish Americans now are our citizens, and to target them is absolute treason to our values. It's treason to American values.
Thank you. Thank you, Mas. Thank you. I must affirm what you said in that 10 years ago, I went to Israel and we land at the Ben Gurion airport and we come out of the airport. The first thing I saw was a man praying with a prayer mat. And later going to Haifa to see the Baha'i Center and meeting many youth in the West Bank was very compelling because the youth kept telling, we don't want this conflict. It is given to us, it's fed to us, it's fed to the world. We want to see an end to this. So people like us who have visited, we have another story to say.
Very true.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. Our next speaker is Sarah Livingston. Before joining AEN, Academic Engagement Network, Sarah Livingston was executive director of Hillel at Ohio University, where she also served as an adjunct professor of Jewish studies. In addition to these roles, Sarah had held key leadership positions in Jewish education and nonprofit leadership. Sarah received her MA in Jewish food history from the University of Toronto and her BA in Russian Jewish history from the Ohio State University. Today, Sarah will talk to us about faculty experience, broadly how anti-Semitic it is, and she talks about speech that is protected by the First Amendment can still contribute to a hostile environment, and she calls on the universities to do something about it. Sarah, thank you.
Thank you, Soraya. I'm very grateful to be here and speaking to all of you about the faculty experience. As a little bit of a background, what we do at the Academic Engagement Network is I've built a network of 1,200 faculty members across over 330 campuses in the US. And all of these faculty members are committed to fighting anti-Semitism, the denigration of Israel, and protecting academic freedom, not free speech exactly, but academic freedom. Free speech, just because it's free doesn't mean it's not full of hate. There's a lot of hate speech out there that's protected by the First Amendment, and it's really up to us to not be hateful. I've written extensively about that and worked with colleagues at Brooklyn College and Columbia University Teachers College on that specific topic. The faculty experience is a unique one. What our students on college campuses have experienced is what Miri and I have basically called the October 8 effect. And it was that these Jewish students on college campuses got attacked immediately following what Hamas did to Israeli civilians on October 7th without a military response by Israel. And that safety and security of those Jewish students on campus and Zionist students on campus was immediately compromised. Our faculty were put in the exact same position. So a vocally Zionist faculty that had been fighting against BDS and the denigration of Israel for many, many years were immediately targeted. And so now what we have is this balance between, not balance, but a shared sort of attack mechanism between Students for Justice in Palestine, which is the attack mechanism on college campuses towards other students. But we also now have Faculty for Justice in Palestine, which is a very challenging space. Faculty are protected in many ways by tenure and by freedom of speech, the First Amendment, and the concept of academic freedom. So what does that mean? Right now, what faculty are experiencing is a deep desire to not only feel safe themselves on campus, but to be visible and be supportive and be the person, as Miri mentioned when she was talking about K through 12, to be that person on campus for these college students that are Jewish and Zionist. So, you know, parents, I'm also a parent, and our kids are similar ages. And here in Cleveland, we live in an enclave of Judaism, which is nice. And I moved here for a reason. But I know so many students in other school districts surrounding me that have no idea, as Jews, who, as a teacher or a counselor or an administrator, that they could go to talk about how they're feeling, that feels safe. So we have on college campuses a network of faculty members that are launching the response to Faculty for Justice in Palestine, which is our Faculty Against Antisemitism movement, and really prioritizing being visible. That experience, being visible, putting themselves out there, does put faculty at risk. Faculty are risking tenure. They're risking tenure review. They're risking being denied tenure altogether. They are risking a reappointment. So if a faculty member is on a visiting professorship, they're very likely, if they're vocally they're vocally Zionist, they are at risk for their contracts not being renewed. And adjunct professors are extremely at risk. Junior faculty without tenure, high risk. So our tenured professors step up. They say things like, I'm willing to get arrested for my cause. Please don't. But we work in tandem together to support not only creating safer college campuses for students, but for faculty themselves. And the faculty hold a unique position. They are, for lack of a better term, the middleman between the students and the administration. And we want to give the students on college campuses as much credit as possible, but they're 18 to 22 years old for the most part, and they don't have the kind of adulting skills that they need to be able to really, truly think critically and engage the way that people with more years of experience and more maturity can do. And our faculty are there to say, we understand, we're frustrated, we're irritated, we're angry, but that's not how university bureaucracy and university administration works. And helping to guide students through processes. And I know that my colleague Julie will be speaking about Title VI in a minute, but I really, the processes for Title VI are risky at best for Jewish students on many college campuses. And compliance officers have been found at schools, at universities in California and the Cal State University system, among others, to be expressively anti-Semitic on their personal social media and still given position to investigate and do the compliance of Title VI at their university that has a very large Jewish student population, with zero transparency from administration of how those Jewish students who are experiencing anti-Semitism are going to be able to account for that Title VI violation and investigation. These students are being ignored and their stuff is being, filed in the circular trash can. And it's very tense. I am not going to look at the questions in the chat. My apologies. I got distracted. I will come back to this. So the faculty are in this position of understanding how the bureaucracy works, understanding how to reach administration, potentially having relationships with administration that students don't have, and being able to create lines of communication that the students couldn't do on their own. So our faculty are in a unique position as this space where students can feel safe and have their voices heard, as well as potentially putting themselves at risk, which is why my organization and my network exists, is to help, support those faculty and push back on that risk. And then they have a unique position with administration. And my organization has an administrator engagement program. It's very specific. The majority of the administrators involved in our administrator programs are not Jewish, and they're genuinely committed. We've engaged with, over the past 10 years, we've engaged with over 5,000 administrators across the US, and they genuinely want to be educated and genuinely want to know if or how they're making missteps.
Thank you.
Some don't.
Thank you so much. Wow. Thank you for making the discernment between students, faculty, and administration. Looks like the administration is very culpable in these instances, because when I was in LA, we saw no Jew exclusion zones at UCLA.
So
fact,
UCLA just received, settled with the federal government for millions of dollars, and they identified a handful of organizations that some of those funds were going to be going to in order to create and engage with anti-Semitism education on campus. And along with UCLA Hillel and some other organizations, my organization, the Academic Engagement Network, is one of those organizations that was listed in the case to be receiving funds in order to create anti-Semitism education on campus for faculty and administration.
Right. You know, Nelson Mandela had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to atone for what went wrong. And I'm not sure how open the administration will be to really say they have failed. Because this is not even about one school or one group of administrators. This is about our country, isn't it? We might raise an entire generation of children, students, youth, who are not proud of this country. All those issues come to play. So, how has it been for you, Sarah, the success of reaching and collaborating with the administration? What is the biggest challenge you encounter?
Delusions of grandeur. No, sorry, I'm trying to be funny. I think that there are a lot of administrators out there that genuinely think they're doing the right thing without the right amount of education to effectively make that decision. They have no idea how wrong they are. And that's really the goal of our administrator engagement programs is, I mean, a lot of these administrators need an understanding of the history of anti-Semitism. They don't have that.
Thank you. Oh yes, thank you. I'm not surprised. Okay, our next speaker, gosh, I looked at the time. We are running out of time. Julie Marzouk is a close friend of mine, and we are partners in crime. She's an attorney, author, and a strategic problem solver with 20 years of experience in legal advocacy, policy analysis, and nonprofit coalitions. Julie is the founder and principal of Marzouk Evolve Advocacy Consulting. Julie also served as an associate law professor at Chapman University. Julie holds a BA in political science from Brandeis University and a JD from University of Berkeley School of Law. So Julie will talk to us about, I've seen the valiant work she has done, all standing alone by herself, and she inspires me. She's going to be focused on ethnic studies in California, Title VI suits, and the importance of local activism in PTA and school boards. Julie, over to you.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah. So I think I'm last, and I'm going to try to tie together as best I can bits of pieces of all of our excellent speakers. So as Soraya mentioned, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and use my own personal story to tie back to what we're talking about. I grew up, as many American Jews did, in the tradition of social justice and always intended to work in that space. And after law school, I spent 15 years working in the immigrants' rights space. And most of my work was representing immigrant victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. I actually went and lived in southern Mexico for almost a year. As a human rights investigator, represented all my clients in Spanish, represented so many women and children, but mostly women from South Asia and North Africa. And this was the work I was committed to for 15 years. There are a lot of Jews in this space. And this is a space that now I am seen as the oppressor, that I am the white oppressor that is harming all of these people who I was and continue to be so dedicated to. And I think that it speaks to what Mars was saying in terms of this compression or miscalculation, misdiagnosis of what Jews represent and our history and our ethnicity, but also our contributions and our desires to be contributing to this larger movement of social justice. And so since, let's say, since 10/7, though it started before that, I have worked exclusively in fighting anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, using legal tools, both advocacy, policy, and litigation. And I do want to tie some of these themes so that Mars talked about, and then the effects that Dr. Miri talked about. So in California, there has been an attempt to mandate something called ethnic studies for all all graduating high school students in order to graduate from a California high school. And it sounds great in theory. Certainly, I value and represent, would further the idea of a pluralistic society and to celebrate the stories of minorities and understand historical discrimination, ongoing discrimination. But what this program has done, as Dr. Mary explained, is to really to divide and further hate, and in particular labeling Jews as the white oppressors, labeling Israel as a colonial settler state. And so this education, there's been various attempts in California to challenge it or to put safeguards on ethnic studies. And what Soraya mentioned in terms of advocacy, it's really very critical that parents know. Sarah and Miri both talked about experiences that their own children had in school. It's really critical to know what your children are being taught. Title VI is Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And for anyone who is in a school or any other educational institution that receives federal funds, there cannot be discrimination or creation of a hostile environment based on various protected categories. And while religion is not specifically identified as a protected category in Title VI, ethnicity, race, and national origin is, and it has been specified through executive order because Jews are an ethno-religion, that Title VI does cover Jews. So what happens when Jews are in this environment and hearing all of this hate and being taught that they are oppressors? In addition to the curriculum, it spills into the classroom and into the interactions among children and the interactions between children and their teachers. And then the social and psychological harm that Mary spoke about is what emanates from that. And so it is important to hold, and I do appreciate very much what Sarah said about the risk, especially in college, that the arbiters of these cases are not neutral or not supportive or not well enough versed in Jewish tradition, Jewish history, Jewish persecution to understand how these incidents are anti-Semitic. But it behooves us as parents to know what our children are being taught, to start at a minimum with the teachers and administrators, to activate lawyers such as myself who can go in and enforce rules, uniform complaint codes in California in addition to Title VI, to make sure that there is not a hostile environment being taught, so that the emotional and psychological effects that Miri spoke about don't emanate for our children. I'm just going to make one more point, Soraya, and then I'll turn it over, which is to say that we touched a bit on First Amendment and free speech rights. And it is also important to know that free speech has limitations. So it is true, and I certainly value freedom of expression, but teachers in public schools are not. They are certainly free to express their political opinions and beliefs outside of schools as individuals, but inside of school, they are bound by not only Title VI, but the rules of the curriculum. And so for professors in the university setting that Sarah works in, they are bound by their codes of conduct, and students as well. So students, although they too have free speech, are not entitled to intimidate, to incite violence, to threaten, directly harass, or to prevent students from having a safe learning environment. And so between Title VI and the First Amendment, it is not the case that anything goes and that all hate speech should be tolerated at any cost.
Thank you, Julie. I have a quick question. You know, recently Secretary Rubio said the Muslim Brotherhood, which has great influence in the United States, will be banned. And he also said some affiliates of the Muslim Brotherhood will be banned. Now, for us Muslims, we don't know anymore who's the Muslim leadership, because most of our leaders like CARE, MPAC, they're fighting for Palestine. So, and I know that ADL has done a large amount of work to bring about awareness on anti-Semitism at schools and campuses. And the Council on American Islam Relations has been out to discount and disallow the work of the ADL. Do you think CARE needs to be investigated and banned themselves?
Well, I have done a lot of work on CARE, and I certainly think that there are a lot of alarm bells and reasons for them to be investigated. It is an organization that receives federal money. It receives money from the state of California, from the city and county of Los Angeles. It's also an organization whose leaders outwardly support terrorism. They have not only condoned, but celebrated the terrorist attacks on October 7th. And the rhetoric that we've all been speaking about today in terms of furthering anti-Semitism through hateful propaganda is something that in California in particular, we see CARE's tentacles of that in so many branches. We see CARE behind ethnic studies curriculum. That was specifically the case in Santa Ana. We see CARE behind legislation in California to defeat legislation that would provide for Holocaust education. CARE was very much behind the city council movements to use municipalities as a vehicle to spread anti-Semitism, and very much giving talking points and manuals for the student protesters as well. And so I think there's financial malfeasance there, support for terrorism. And I think that it is important, Mars spoke about our inability to condemn because we will be labeled Islamophobes. And certainly I have received that hate. And I would love for there to be a different nonprofit, a different voice for the Muslim community, that when there's an issue for the Muslim community, instead of calling CARE to be the point of contact for the publicity, that we have someone whose concerns really are with the welfare of the Muslim American community.
Thank you, Julie. That's exactly what we are aspiring to do. AMVAC is spearheading, leading the way in being the largest and only civil rights movement where we will not only ensure civil liberties, we will ensure that America is not hated the way it is hated, and we will ensure that Muslim women will lead this charge. We are out of time, and I don't think we can take any questions. If our panelists will answer those respective questions, post to them online on this chat. And I want to assert, as I asserted at the very beginning, what we see in the Muslim world is a justification of anti-Semitism. And that is so because anti-Semitism and Zionism is being conflated with the Israeli government. They say, I have no problem with the Jew, but I hate the Zionists. And we Muslim women, we will assert, we continue to assert, while dissent against Israeli government actions is a legitimate part of global political dialogue, Muslim world must stop using it as an excuse for Jew hatred. So we call upon Muslim leaders, particularly in the mosques and Muslim civic organizations, to say, that anti-Semitism is not American and anti-Semitism is not Muslim. So please stay in touch with us and support our work. And I'm going to ask Julie, not Julie, to Elena to drop our website. And I'm so sorry we couldn't take questions.
I would like to ask that if you know any progressive Muslim faculty on any university campus that is willing to stand with their Jewish and Zionist faculty members side by side, to please reach out to me, and I'm happy to connect with them and support them standing next to Jewish and Zionist faculty around the country. And it would be amazing to get more Muslim progressives involved that are on college campuses. I think right now they're afraid.
Thank you, Sarah. Great ask. I'm going to quickly take half a minute, maybe. Maz, Miri, and Julie, what do you want from the Muslim community? What is your ask? Make it really short.
My ask would be twofold. One is, if you see a particular student, if you happen to be present, or that you could interrupt bullying just as you would with anyone else, without understanding the deeper issues, without having to solve Middle East peace, to stop a situation in which a child is feeling attacked, but also to hear Jewish stories, to hear my in-laws' stories of Jewish refugees from Egypt, to learn the diversity of Jewish history and Jewish peoplehood.
Thank you. Miri?
My ask is that, very similar to Julie, please don't be a bystander, be an upstander. Speak for us when we're not in the room, not just when we're in the room, and especially in those places where people are dehumanizing us. So get to know us, the person on a personal level, see us as people, as human beings, and not as problems, and be there for us, because we will cheer for you all the way.
Thank you. Thank you. My heart is full hearing you say that, and we have no doubt about that. Thank you. Mas, quick ask.
Well, again, I'm brought back to my memories of visiting Israel. We in one of our visits, the host brought us to meet some of his colleagues and friends who are representative of Muslim youth leadership in an organization called Atidna. These Muslim youth are active in their community to steer their communities away from extremism. They are most definitely, certainly, citizens of Israel. They're supportive of the country. They don't want to see anything happen to it. But when it comes to discussing some of the issues right now regarding Palestinianism, and especially some of the fundamentalism that happens in Islamic circles, they didn't shy away from the conversation. They didn't smear people from Islamophobia, and I understand why the reflex is of the sort. They're like many of the Muslim peoples I know are fine individuals who support what I term modern humanistic values, and I would ask that, while the reflex to respond in hostile fashion when you're criticized is understandable, I'll take the opportunity to say that there's a real problem with fundamentalism, and it's leading to this conflict. And I would ask them to be very, very careful about how they choose their leaders. You definitely don't want care. You don't want to be following care. You want to be following more reasonable voices. And I'll take the opportunity to plug the Clarity Coalition, a group of Muslims and Muslim reformists trying to push back against anti-Semitism and the extremism. So
thank you so much. So in last parting words would be, let us take to heart the words of Dr. King, who said, if you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But if you can't crawl, sit. And he says, for goodness sake, don't wait without doing anything. So let us continue to fight this evil, this virus of anti-Semitism, and dispel hate in our country, and anti-Americanism. All of this goes together. And also, if there's Muslim bigotry, I want us all to say no to that. And I know you will. So let's move forward and meet again soon. Thank you again, Sarah, Maz, Miri, and Julie, and all those who signed in and listened to us. Really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
thank you.